Thank you very much. That's a quick lead in. So first, I'd like to thank Elton, Stefan, Leif, and Tom for inviting me. This is really a very, very nice invitation coming back home to archaeology. As you will see, I left it somewhat. I will speak about topography and topology, and I will start this talk with a question. Actually, it's a question about a sentence. I will start with a sentence. Besides that part of geometry which is concerned with quantities, so think GIS, and is developed all the time with high interest, the other part is still very much unknown, first mentioned by called the geometry of the site. So who do you think said that sentence? Because this is the essence of what we're talking about today. If you talk about networks and about geographic space. So it's from a very, very, very famous paper, which unfortunately nobody reads. It's the Königsberg Bridge problem by Euler, the Solutio Problematis ad Geometriam Situs Pertinentis. And he actually got that idea of the Geometriam Situs, which is the geometry in space without distances. So he was not interested in how long the way is from bridge 1 to bridge 2. He was just interested if bridge 1 and bridge 2 are connected. And he has that from a guy called Leibniz, who's pretty awesome actually, because he's the prototype of what digital humanities researchers should actually do, I think. He came up with binary numbers, decimal classification for librarians, differential equations, evolution in cats way before Darwin, geometry, linguistics, logic, mechanical calculator, matrices and determinants of them, monads, which think of cognitive science where you have symbols without any extension, paleontology in caves, and the theater of art and nature, which basically means he was also an art historian. And he did hang out in women's conferences in pretty fashionable clothes, so it makes him really weird. So after Leibniz and after Euler, that gave rise to Geometriam Situs, gave rise to random graph theory with Erdős and Rényi, and later on, around 2000, to the new science of networks, which is, people can reject that it exists, but there is a new, kind of crowd of people who are very multidisciplinary who come up with a lot of literature. So we have transformed the bridges, this is the ground plan, say, of the bridges in Königsberg, to this problem, so we have a graph with nodes and links. And meanwhile, while this was happening, disconnected from it, other people were building graph databases. So we all converged on graph databases, right? So our father's generation, like doctoral advisors and whatever, people we worked for, in the 1990s had a quarrel about operating systems, about metadata standards, whatever. And now we all use semantic web technology, and we talk again about the content, which is nodes and links, what you see up there. So this is just one proprietary thing. So what you see down here is basically a formatting rule, sort of an ontology plus a style sheet to make the stuff up there, right? But in the background you see this graph. So this whole situation gives rise to explosive multidisciplinarity, and this is what I want to convince you of, and I want to inject some aspects which are important within that circumstance, which are usually left out because they're a little bit harder to manage, and we are totally not prepared if we study archaeology and art history, say, for example. So this is just my sort of entry into this. I did these kind of formatting rules, and then I wrote my PhD about monument documentation, sort of. This is the 35,000 monument documentation events. So every document is linked to a monument if the monument appears in a document. And you can see this results in a giant connected component of a network where basically of 89.9% of all links in this Renaissance document structure being connected to each other, which means from every drawing via the monuments you can go to 89% of all other drawings, and from 89%, from monument to documents you can jump. An interesting thing is this basically makes it a subject of physics, because what happens is if you throw enough links on top of each other, you have a phase transition, percolation going on, and then you can actually study it quantitatively, right? So I joined these two guys as a postdoc, first Laszlo Barabasi, then Dirk Helding, and within being there, I started a symposium series with Roger Malina, who is the head of Leonardo, the International Society for Art, Science and Technology, And we just shouted these 3 words out there, right? So arts, humanities, complex networks. And it's like a radar beacon. And the interesting thing is we got answers from all the continents, from all these disciplines. And so this is the self-identification of the authors in that symposium series. And you have to see that it's not some social scientist doing a social science paper or a musicologist doing a musicology paper. It's always intertwined. And so I'm just an example for a crowd of people which is really explosively growing. And what I'm doing is I'm an archaeologist / art historian, classical archaeologist, so an excavate. And I collaborate with computer scientists, information designers, and physicists. And here is how this is helpful. So I will use this picture. I stole it from your website, and I will debate 4 aspects of it. And I think first I have to say this is really an awesome achievement. This is what we need. Okay. So before criticizing, I want to say that. But this also enables us to go where no archaeologist has ever gone before. Okay. So let's talk about this little figure over here. So what we see here is a ranking of cities, right? They're sorted by frequency of documentation. And so what we're talking about is actually the physics of attention. An interesting thing is, you can do that for a lot of things, not only locations, you can do that for people. This is the persons that appear in the latest book of Martin Kemp, which is an art historian in Oxford. And it's just the appearance of these 1-grams or names in Google Ngrams over 500 years, right, or 200 years, from 1800 to 2000, over a log scale. And what you can see, once a word emerges, like Hitler or Churchill or Guevara or Che Guevara, they have, after their first high point, they basically go back to some fitness level around which they fluctuate. An interesting thing is, you can see that all the guys are fluctuating around each other, right? So your rank is not set. There's only one stable guy in this whole book, which is Christ. It's always number 1, okay? So I said, I had the hunch that something like this is going on. We didn't have pretty pictures. I said, okay, the Colosseum, the Apollo Belvedere, and the Pantheon are always on top over 650 years. But if you look further down, the river gods are fluctuating all the time, right? And Laszlo Barabasi said, that's interesting. And after 3 years and 6 physicists and the math totally leaving what I'm capable of understanding, they come up with a continuum theory of basically icons, canons, and cacophonies. Icons are the guys like Christ, which are rank stable and score stable. Canons, or objects that belong to the canon, are things that have a fitness level around which they fluctuate, but they still compete for the rank, which is pretty bloody if you're, say, in the business of selling 3D televisions, right, or cell phones, for example. And then there is also a regime which you can induce just by adding noise. Think of like post-modernist terminology. You just come up with some words, you throw it into the room, and then you destabilize the entire canon of what's going on. So while we have actually looked at like real-world systems where you have data which spans several orders of magnitude, I want you to be aware that actually if you look at this ranking, you will have some guys which are more stable than others, like Roma and Italy are obvious examples, right? In any data set they're on top, if it's about Roman times. But there is some fluctuation going on, and we don't have an idea what's going on because we don't have enough data, and this project is one of the projects which gives us this data. Number 2, computer science, mining, and learning. Okay? So computer science is different from physics. Physics is interested in general laws. And computer science looks for patterns. They're just, as a computer science working for a supermarket company, you're just satisfied if you sell more diapers than the supermarket down the street. Okay? As a physicist, you want to know why people buy beer and diapers, for example. Okay? So in computer science, the problem is a little bit easier on one hand, but then it's also harder. So here you can see some clear patterns of correlation, right? So there's these 2 locations, Constantinopolis and Carthago, Solia and Carthago, which obviously correlate. So they are in the same part of the book and they're never mentioned again. For example, that is a pattern we can find by sorting this kind of matrix, right? This is a matrix of points in time and locations. And then we can come up with patterns. as you look to bioinformatics or brain science, you will see that the first figure is always a pipeline how you do that, because it's so complicated. So this is an example where we did something similar. We looked at co-classification patterns in a library database. And this is a funny example because it's basically just occurrences in text, but it's like way, way less data, sort of, right? You're not looking at every word, just as the words, the librarian things are important for the book. And so you can see we do two-channel kind of data mining there, two different pipelines to come up with something which actually goes beyond the regular user interface of the database and beyond simple network visualization, which obviously gives you a hairball, right? Or a radiculogram, or Arab Malcolm says, a spaghetti monster. So what you see as the result of this data mining is a structured spaghetti monster. So you can see this blue structure. This is the communities of topics in classical archaeology. They're held together by subject themes that co-occur between the communities. That's the blue structure. And you can see there is different clusters, a location or geographic cluster, which is the green clusters, and a history cluster, which is more interested in dating, which is very interesting. You can see that structure emerging in the 1960s, but then it's actually getting more sharp, which is sort of equivalent to the fact that art historic archaeologists hang out in the libraries even more, and the excavation archaeologists hang out outside even more, and they talk less. And so the idea is we have to actually do that, but it's incredibly complicated. So we really have to actually align with other disciplines like brain science, like bioinformatics, like gene sequencing and whatever, and take a look where we can learn from each other. So I'm pretty sure in this room there will be people, if they go down the computer science train, they will end up writing papers in very different disciplines, probably not only involving archaeology, because what they do in archaeology can maybe also be used in biology, for example. Then the third thing is a simple thing. So if you listen to what key practitioners in the digital humanities say, what digital humanities is about. It's about collecting data, making the data explorable, meaning building tools. And that means visualization, to a large extent, at least by the CEOs of large institutes, is actually meant to be used for communicating information. So you have these dashboard functions, like in this case, where you can say, okay, let's take the information that's in Herodotus, or in this book, for example, Edward Gibbon, and just communicate it to the audience so I can use it just like a book in the library. But this is also an interesting thing because it's only half of the reality, right? So the dream is that basically the project does a creative action producing the dashboard, and the researcher actually perceives that visualization. While what's actually going on is a feedback loop in that triangle, right? And you can see there is a fuzzy corner in that semantic triad. Seeing and doing something is actually the same process in the brain, right? So we build up every memory out of distinct bits of information, and we also create something about distinct bits of information. And that, working with that feedback loop, we can go beyond the dashboard. And to give you a huge failure, but also a chance, this is the data model of a very famous art history database, the Census of Antique Works of Art and Architecture known in Renaissance. It's just a weighted entity relationship diagram. It looks a little bit more fancy than your regular kind of access or FileMaker kind of thing, but in principle it's the same thing. And it just sized the nodes and the links by how many instances you have, how many dates, how many inscriptions, and so on. You can take that and then put all the data into that data model. So this table is just a matrix, the same thing as this node link diagram, and we put all the data in there, okay? So you can say from a dashboard perspective, somebody who wants to communicate something about the database, this is a huge failure, because this does not, totally not cater to a wider audience, right? Because nobody knows how to read that. It's not that we went through like 600 years of central perspective and everybody, even my dog knows how to read it, right? This is something we come up with. And this is the big problem in information visualization. We come up with new conventions every day, and then people have to actually read them. So we have to keep it simple. But as a researcher, I know, me doing that, I know how to read that. And so you see all these little captions here are actually insightful evaluations of this data set. And if you go to certain cells, for example this one, the person location cell, you can actually end up doing something like this. This is a project which I started about 2 years ago. Again, there is 2 physicists, an information designer, another physics student, Laszlo Barabasi, who's a physicist, who's very multidisciplinary, Dirk Helding, who's a physicist who has a chair for sociology. And we used that person location cell to actually come up with a sophisticated network of locations where the people are the links, which is not something, you know, for locations you use a GIS database, and for talking about people you use prosopographies, right? But this is basically using prosopographies for doing something geographic. And this is actually it's in review in Science since 2.5 months, so I'm still hoping for the best, and the probability is, as you know, 24% or something like that. So even if it's good, but at least we're in review. So basically, this is what you can do if you actually take something which is outside the dashboard. So my take-home message is, please dump all your data. Give us your data as dumps, because there is thousands of people out there who are itchy to do something with it you couldn't even think of possible, and that will actually, you know, give you more funding in the future. It's the same as in biology. And then the last thing is there a gorilla in the closet? I would say many, and I just point to one. Heterogeneity. Everybody has heard about power laws of frequency or heterogeneous distribution, non-power laws, whatever. But here you can see there's a couple of locations where you have a lot of mentions, but then it fades out, and if you go down, you can actually see there's a lot of locations which are only mentioned once. But if you go into the temporal dimension, it's not clear what's the heterogeneous. Is this bursty? Is it irregular? Is it harmonic? Is there noise? Nobody has an idea. And it's even worse. Actually, there's a huge gorilla in the closet, which is exponential growth of data. It's in every discipline, especially if you talk on historical timescales. And just to give you an idea, world population grows super exponentially, data grows exponentially. That means either there's something missing, or you know, there's some papers and research and PhDs in there, right? And in archaeology, it's especially hard because, as we all know, the stuff deteriorates over time. So the further back we go, the more valuable our documents become, right? And so there's a lot of, I think this situation, again, is part of the reason why network science conferences in this year are about 70% about time and networks. So again, this is something which is abound in all disciplines. So again, the last thing, explosive multidisciplinarity. This is how you can do what I have done. You need a lot of collaborators, okay? Thanks to all of them. And some very non-risk averse funders. And I was very, very lucky, I have to say. I found a position where people hired me for my CV and not for filling something which they had predefined, which is the University of Texas at Dallas, a really awesome place. And this is not last year in Marienbad, so if you look at this, it's actually real. It's a picture, a photograph that was taken a week ago. This is our new building. It was $60 million. There's an isolated sound studio. There's a huge lecture hall where we can mimic any acoustics. There is the artists are back there, and what we do is FAD 3D, 3D FAD, FAD D3, and some badass art science, which I'm part of. I hope so. We aim for it. And it's very important, it's art science minus the minus. So we try to do it at the same time. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Max. That was bang on time, I think. So we have a few minutes for questions. I don't know, do you need the next speaker to change over as well?
Yeah, we get 3 minutes.
Got a question for Max?
I have some programs for the symposium series if you're interested. So any questions?
I guess I have the privilege then of asking the first question. I mean, it's a fairly general question of some fantastic stuff there, but in terms of the challenges of visualization, you saying that you can understand the diagrams, Are we working towards trying to get diagrams that everyone can understand, or there's always going to be a level of interpretation, you have to explain it, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think certain things need a lot of communication, and then maybe they stick, right?
Yeah.
But to give you an idea, I go to conferences where people are very multidisciplinary, and there are some people have it much easier. They say, "Hi, I'm a brain scientist," right? Say, "Okay, this guy must be smart," right? And I need 3 sentences to explain what I'm doing, right? And it's the same is true for the visualizations, but I hope in 3 years that's different. Okay. Does that answer the question, sort of?
That's good feedback, yeah. We still got somewhere to go. I've struggled for a long time to visualise the stuff I do. Yours is much more impressive. Does anyone else want to pick up on anything else?
Yeah, I'm there in the break, so yeah. Thanks.